disease. It's now my great pleasure to introduce you to Corey Treleaven, who is a cancer patient, and he will tell you his story. He also is a pilot, and he's a fitness freak, and he's a lovely bloke. And there's a whole lot of stuff, but I think I've read his speech, so I know most of it he's going to tell you. So I'm just going to say, please welcome Corey.
Richard. Good evening, everyone. Professor Ian Oliver, the room of the Patient View Steering Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As Richard mentioned, my name's Corey Treleaven. I was asked by Rare Cancer to give a patient perspective on this evening's speeches. I'm living with a stage 4 adenocarcinoma that developed in my right-hand lung. It's a very rare gene mutation style cancer. It occurs in about 150 people in Australia and about 40,000 worldwide each year. I want to kind of firstly mention and provide a bit of a disclaimer to my speech tonight. I'm a layman when it comes to cancer and the cancer treatment world, the therapy world. So I've had a 1.5 year crash course since I was diagnosed, so I apologise if I misquote or misrepresent some of the processes, the issues and the statistics with regards to cancer and its treatment. However, I hope I've got enough common knowledge and I've retained enough to be around the mark for the majority of what I say. When I was invited to speak, I looked at the invitation and had a bit of a chuckle because I was a University of South Australia graduate back in '98. I did a Bachelor's of Applied Science in Civil Aviation, which is essentially a civil aviation pilot degree. 17 years ago, there's no way I would have ever imagined I'd be living with this terminal condition and speaking here tonight, but life's a funny thing, as we all know. Hopefully I can provide you here tonight with a more elaborate personal view of some of the challenges people, especially that rare cancer patients face. Given that, my intention tonight is to illustrate the effectiveness of the new generation cancer therapies by speaking about my personal experiences with a targeted gene therapy drug called Xalkori, sometimes known as, also known as crizotinib, throughout the rest of the world. I'd like to give an idea of the difference between it and traditional chemotherapies. I'd like to speak of the disadvantage of having a rare cancer type similar to mine and primarily financial difficulties with accessing treatment. I'd also like to touch on a further rare type cancer patient disadvantage, or some of the disadvantages, specifically the fact that some cancer therapies only have financial assistance attached to them for cancer occurrence in specific parts of the body. And I'll finish by raising a few questions about the health technology assessment process that permits medication onto the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. And to do all of that, I want to explain my situation in a fair amount of detail, just to let you know what cancer has done to me physically and what it's done to my family and I mentally. I think that'll help explain where I'm coming from and give you a good perspective of what a rare cancer patient has to deal with. No doubt you all have experience with more common cancer types or working with patients with these more common cancers, and I'm sure you're well aware of the treatment realities, the health realities, and hopefully that will allow you to compare the two experiences between regular cancers, or more common cancers, and rare cancers, and form a relative view of the disadvantages those with the rare cancers have. So who am I? I'm a husband to my beautiful wife Kelly, sitting back there. I've got 2 young children, Asher 4, my left arm there, and Zach right, who turned 2 this week actually and just started his Montessori. Asher started kindy a couple of weeks ago too, for the first time. And I was born and raised in Adelaide, and I thought from a very young age I felt that flying airplanes would be a kind of a good thing to do when I grew up. And I kind of persisted with that, went to UniSA, as I spoke of earlier, gained a Bachelor's in Applied Science and Civil Aviation and all my Australian flying licences. And then I am lucky enough to hold a US passport, so I moved to the United States and spent 6 years teaching people to fly, taught college kids to fly, flew business jets throughout the US, Canada, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean island chains, and spent another 3 years working for the world's largest regional airline at the time. It was owned by Delta Airlines, and flew to 110 different destinations throughout the US. Had a great time there, but I always had the dream of returning to fly for Qantas. It was always something I wanted to do since I was yay high. And on my second try at getting in through the door, I managed to pull the wool over their eyes and started in the end of 2004. I was the second officer on the 747 fleet for close to 9 years. So I flew from Australia throughout Europe, the US, New Zealand, South America, South Africa, Asia and Japan. And then at the final part of my career with Qantas, I spent 2 years on the domestic fleet, flying 737s throughout Australia. I was always a healthy, living, extremely fitness conscious type of person. Played many, many sports throughout my life, and mostly because it was my makeup and I enjoyed doing that kind of thing, but also because I had the requirement to hold an aviation medical certificate. In mid-2000, I was probably at the fittest point of my life. I'd spent quite a few years excessive compulsively on improving my road cycling performance, and I was riding with a lot of A and B grade road cycling people several times a week. That year I had just a regular cold in about June, and a dry cough kind of hung around for a while, several weeks after I'd knocked the rest of the symptoms on the head. So I consulted my doctor. I had them do a chest x-ray and it was fine, and started me on a course of antibiotics. That didn't work. Second antibiotics didn't work. So I had another chest x-ray, which showed up a collapsed middle lobe in my right hand side, and the doctor said, "Beauty, pneumonia." That's a pretty typical kind of thing, just show a collapsed lobe. So we started on the third course of antibiotics, which didn't move it, and that's when I had further tests. Went to a chest clinic, had a PET scan, and mid-October that year in 2014, with Kelly and my 6-year-old boy next to me, received the news that I had a stage 4 adenocarcinoma in my right hand lung that had originated there. It had already spread to my right hand lymph nodes, 3 vertebrae in my pelvis. And you've all got a lot of experience with the cancer world. I don't have to tell you how devastating that can be, especially when you've got a young child sitting on your lap. Luckily, it's not hereditary. What I have is, like I said earlier, a very rare gene mutation. It's an ALK positive gene mutation. I won't go into the full definition of what that is, but I'll just let you know it's pretty rare, as I mentioned earlier. So luckily I won't pass it on to my children. It could happen to anyone. All of us have these gene mutations in our body every second of our lives, and they normally get wasted through the lymphatic system, and we carry on into the sunset. Unfortunately, for some reason that medical science still hasn't established, some keep going, and obviously mine kept going. And it wasn't until I had that dry cough that I realised anything was awry. Like I said, only 150 of us in Australia are lucky enough to develop this each year, and 40,000 in the world. So with a world population of about 7 billion, you could safely beat your house any day of the week that you wouldn't get this style of cancer. So it's pretty hard not to feel ripped off, I have to admit. But I don't tend to dwell on that. That's life. So I quickly started chemo. I had a combination gemcitabine and cisplatin combo. Apparently you're only allowed to have 10 shots of this in your life because it's so bad on you. It's got so much platinum in there. It does so many nasty things to you. The next 2 months, which was November, December 2014, showed fantastic improvements on the CT scans. And just prior to Christmas, had a great scan that showed lots of spots that were in my lung had disappeared. In the meantime, my voice had become quite croaky. I now know that's because there was a tumour pushing on a nerve in my right-hand lung. So everything was looking pretty good. But by mid-January, I finished that chemo combination and moved on to another chemo, Limpta. I had one infusion of that, and it's more of a long-term style chemo that you can suffer for long periods of time, for want of a better word. That infusion of Limpta was accompanied by a few litres of hydrating fluid, and that's pretty typical when you do get chemo. They hydrate you prior to receiving it, and I walked out feeling quite bloated pretty normal. Bloated legs, bloated stomach, yeah, pretty much operation's normal after you've received that. That was a Friday. By Monday, it hadn't moved. My legs were still quite bloated. They'd increased. My abdomen had got even larger, and my breathing had started to become noticeably more difficult. Now, I just want to remind you again that I'm going to this in a fair amount of detail, and my intention for doing so is to show how powerful the drug I'm on is and its effectiveness. So, yeah, forgive me. Just please bear with me here for a little while. So by Monday, my legs were bloated, my abdomen was huge, my breathing was horrible, and by Wednesday night, I was up vertical for 20 minutes, down 20 minutes all night long because I couldn't get comfortable. Had several sessions on the floor just trying to catch my breath and becoming a bit worried. I just assumed it was normal end of tough chemo kind of run. Everyone says it's horrible. It's the worst thing you ever experienced. So I just thought, okay, that operation's normal for the end of chemo. But by Thursday I'd had enough, and I said to my oncologist, something's not right. So I went and had a CT scan. Showed up some pulmonary emboli, some blood clots in my lung, in my right hand lung. So he put me onto blood thinners. And unfortunately that exacerbated the problems that I had had, because Thursday and Friday night were a repeat of the 20 minutes up, 20 minutes down, and by Saturday morning I had to stop halfway from the bathroom, from the living room to the bathroom to catch my breath. So something was obviously not normal. I went into hospital, they admitted me straight into intensive care, and they performed a pericardial or a heart drain on me. And they pulled out a litre of blood from the pericardium, where it's only supposed to be lubricating fluid and blood. So there was a litre out that right then and there, and over the next 24 hours they pulled out another 700 mils. So I'd suffered it a fairly long time, and I probably should have got to that hospital a bit earlier in hindsight. So I was in intensive care for about 4 days. I had a pleural drain or a lung drain on my right hand side. On the Monday they pulled out a litre of fluid from there, and I had a similar amount of fluid in my left hand side as well. They chose to leave that there because I'd been through a fair bit of physical trauma at that point, and they didn't want to introduce any more risk of infections or any other complications. So obviously time was pretty critical to try and get this cancer under control. And I couldn't really afford to wait and see if that first shot of Alimta chemo was going to do the job over the next couple of weeks. We had to get on something quickly. Xalkori, or crizotinib, the gene therapy, targeted gene therapy medication I spoke to you about earlier, or that I'm on, was the answer essentially. That was my best chance of getting it under control. But it wasn't an easy decision, which sounds ridiculous, I know. Xalkori at the time cost $7,500 a month. It had been approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration here in Australia for several years as a treatment. You could throw it down your throat for years, but yet it cost $7,500 a month because it hadn't been approved for coverage under the PBS, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. I'll speak a bit more about the financial decisions in a little bit, so bear with me, but leaving hospital 9 days later after that kind of trauma, I'd lost so much muscle mass, I was about 10 kilos lighter. I was gaunt and looked like I'd starved myself, which was pretty much what had occurred during that week. I found it extremely difficult to eat sufficiently. The physical effects of that left me pretty shaky on my feet, and I did find it pretty difficult to walk at that stage. And I'll never forget the feeling of walking out of the hospital and going to cross the road, and how intimidating it was and how fast those cars came down the street. I felt like a 100-year-old person, and yeah, it was just incredible. So I guess my point being, I was in a pretty bad way. However, after about 2 weeks, I started to notice a change for the better on top of an improvement from such a low physical base. And typically those who do respond to Xalkori, which is about 60% of people, so 1 in 2 don't respond, but 60% is a fantastic response rate, as most of you know, when it comes to cancer treatment. But most of those do respond very well and notice a difference within a couple of weeks. So I slowly built my swimming fitness. I got back to my normal weight and muscle mass within probably about 4 months after that. And the scan results since then that I've had have shown a terrific improvement. I had a primary tumour when I went into hospital of 55 millimetres long, several other ones that were probably not far off that. But that primary tumour over the next successive amounts of successive scans over the next, each scan was approximately 3 months between scans, went from 55 mils to 45 to 30, down to 20, and then my last one, late November, they couldn't accurately measure the tumour because there was a lot of scar tissue where it had been. My bonies, the spots in my spine, I should say, it's a fantastic result. I pinch myself every day, I really do. The spots that were in my vertebrae were still there, but they were stable, nothing had changed. There's no new growth, all fluid had removed or had gone from my lungs, no more had built up in my heart, my voice returned to normal as a result of the tumour stopping its push against my nerve. So now, to all extents, I'm completely normal. I have been for a long time, probably mid last year, 4 months after getting out of hospital. I've been at my normal weight and swimming about a kilometre and a half most days. Quite a keen ocean swimmer. And, Australia Day this year I did a 4.5k ocean swim and came first in my age group just this last weekend on a 4k ocean swim down at Glenelg off the Adelaide coast. It's just amazing how effective this drug has been. Just incredible. I've got no idea physically I've got anything at all. No aspect of my life is different to normal. I only have some very tiny side effects, an off stomach occasionally, and a little bit of low light, kind of a shadowing effect when you move your vision in very low light at night, but that's only rare. But most importantly though, I'm a normal husband. I'm a normal dad, I'm a normal brother, a normal friend. I do everything with those guys normally every day. So I've had an absolutely incredible response, and the beautiful thing about my response is it's not just a bit of luck. The fantastic thing is that those 60% of people that do respond on Xalkori tend to respond extremely well. I'm not an exception, I'm pretty much the rule when it comes to responses on that drug. Having said that, I am stage 4, so I won't get rid of it. Xalkori has a progression-free survival of the time before your cancer begins to grow again, essentially, of about 10 to 11 months. So I'm around 14 months, so that certainly is in the back of my mind most minutes of the day, as I'm sure you can understand. So where to from here for me? I keep using it while it works. Feel good. So everything is good. Keep going, over scan every 3 or 4 months with contrast dye to see what has been occurring. But typically what will occur is a few spots will pop up at some stage. 50% of people on my drug get brain tumours because the medication doesn't permeate the blood-brain barrier very well. So essentially you'll probably deal with those spots wherever they may pop up with radiation, whilst Xalkori is still doing 95% of the job. However, you'll reach a point eventually where it's obvious the change of medication is required. And I won't go into detail on what further treatments there are down the road, but I will say there are. Xalkori is a first-generation targeted gene therapy drug, and there are 3 other second-generation drugs, of which only one's available in Australia at the moment. Hopefully one will work. They have similar response rates to Xalkori, possibly slightly less, 50 to 60%. There's currently a 3rd generation in trials that a few of us in the room are currently on that trial with throughout the world. Fingers crossed that'll be available when I'll need it down the track. So here I am, a year out of intensive care, and where I really dodged an imminent bullet there. I'm fit, healthy, I have been for most of the last year, and I do mean to brag by that because it's just been fantastic. I can't stress how amazingly effective this drug has been and the new cancer treatment types are becoming. That's the effectiveness message I want to get across in my talk. It blows my mind that something can be so effective, yet extremely well tolerated, yet not rid you of the cancer. But what also blows my mind, what blows my mind even more, is how long such an effective treatment has taken to come from, to make it from approval status in the US to PBF's coverage here in Australia, considering its fantastic outcomes have been known for years. And I want to give you a bit of an idea of Xalkori specifically and talk a bit more about that. It's a drug produced by Pfizer. It's been around for about 5 years. It's very specific. It's only designed to be effective against the ALK positive gene mutation that I have, and as I said, it's extremely rare. In basic terms, has a response rate of close to 60%, as opposed to your chemotherapies that are 20 to 30% at best, from what I'm told. There's very few side effects, as I've mentioned. My basic understanding of how it works is it targets a gene mutation that occurs in the cancer cells. It prevents that from occurring. It's able to hold or reduce tumour sizes before the cancer develops resistance and begins growing again. It's part of quite a new concept in cancer treatment. It's a direct outcome of the Human Genome Project that started back in 1990, and it ran for about 13 years, that project. And I'm sure you probably all remember that it culminated in the sequencing of the entire human genome. It was quite, it made the headlines back then. As a bit of a side note, flying the 747 for Qantas, I had quite a few trips to London. And one of my favourite things to do was just get out and have a look at the exhibitions, the museums they have. And for some reason, even prior to me getting this, I remember going to an exhibition at a museum. I can't remember which one it was, but it was essentially an exhibition about that unlocking of the entire human genome. And it was a huge room. It consisted of binders of paper on which were printed individual, probably about 5 font letters that made up the human genome. And I remember being in this room, and it was just packed with binders. And it was just floor-to-ceiling binders, A4 binders, A3 binders, I should say. And I had to look it up earlier because my drug is a direct result of that work. And I looked it up earlier on, and it took 2,369 reams of paper, each one containing 500 pages of these letters. And I just get a real kick out of that because the way I'm feeling right now is a direct result of that hard work. And I just find that quite amazing. But like I said, Xalkori's only been available for about 5 years. And I'll run you through a bit of a timeline of how long it's taken to get here. It was approved by the US Food and Drug Administration back in August 2011. The Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration in September 2013. In between those dates, it had been available on a very strict compassionate grounds. Essentially, I'd say a fair amount of people that would have benefited from it probably didn't get that drug because it was so strict. But don't quote me on it, like I said earlier. It took a further 2 years after the Therapeutic Goods Administration approved it in 2013 until it was listed on the PBS here in July last year. So that was close to 4 years since its US approval before the PBS finally covered this highly effective drug. And during that time, you're one of the lucky few or unlucky few, whichever way you want to look at it, to have that drug available to you on compassionate grounds, or you're more likely to pay $7,500 a month to access it. So that was a bit of a side note. I'll go back to my intensive care bed where I needed to decide whether to pay $7,500 a month for treatment. Here I was literally on what could have been my deathbed, and almost was. And the best thing I had to control this cancer was Xalkori. For the treatment outcomes, it was an absolute no-brainer. Everyone was telling me, go for it, yep, mortgage your house to get on it, do whatever you can. But when it came to the financial decision to try and access it, it was extremely difficult. And I just wanted to point out how ridiculous that statement I just made is. The best medical option I had to survive was so expensive, I had the difficult choice to either survive by taking it or most likely die because I couldn't afford it. And in basic terms, I just find it extremely hard to rationalise why the best medical option for someone to be treated and survive is out of reach for most of the people who require it. I just have thought about that, and I just can't understand why that would have been the case. I checked the PBS charter. on the website recently, and it essentially states that the entire reason for its being is to offer timely, reliable, affordable medicines to Australians irrespective of their wealth or their circumstance. And I'm not an idiot. I know this world's driven by financial outcomes to a fair extent, but I'm still at a loss to understand how someone's best treatment compared to other applicable therapies is so out of reach, especially given that the PBS charter, given that that is the PBS's charter and whole reason for existence. Once again, I'm a layman, so I may have missed something along the way, so forgive me if I have. So I had to access this drug, I had to find the money, I had to try and get it in my veins. With the help of my sister-in-law, I wrote a piece that was kindly posted by Rare Cancers Australia, who had only just heard about it, because I only just heard about the fact that I had cancer. I found them on Google, as we find everything else out, and I found that it was founded by Richard and Kate Vines for two reasons. Mainly because they felt access to treatment for rare cancer patients was inadequate. But also because they felt if you did develop a rare cancer, you're essentially a minority group with little voice, almost ignored by government, and had no political power as a result. I personally think Rare Cancers Australia has filled a huge void in the rare cancer treatment world here in Australia, and they have developed a platform for all rare type cancer patients to crowdfund in an attempt to cover some of their treatment costs. And I say attempt specifically because with costs as high as those for Xalkori, for example, and Xalkori isn't the only one that's expensive, many people still aren't able to afford their medications. And I urge all of you to please take a look at Rare Cancer Australia's crowdfunding page, Sick or Treat. I think you'll find it extremely enlightening. You see examples there of rare cancer patients and their relative successes of raising funds for their treatment. A sad fact is that Rare Cancer Australia has set up an arm of their services for financial advice recently, a majority of which is through pro bono financial advisors that help patients try and find the money to access these treatments. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you all that many patients have to make drastic, stressful financial decisions, mortgaging their houses, utilising their superannuation early, and cashing in life insurance policies, just to access these medications. All of this at a time when they should be surrounded by their loved ones and concentrating on the human aspects of their lives. And I think whatever means you come from, $7,500 a month, it's actually $8,100 a month now. Although I'll talk a bit more of that later. That's its list price, yet now it is covered under the PBS. But speaking of a couple of years ago, or up until July last year, $7,500 was a lot of money to come up with. Kelly and I would have been able to fund it by redrawing on our home mortgage. But huge bills like that, whilst being unable to work and trying to support two young children, would have depleted our savings pretty rapidly. So we went down the crowdfunding road with Kate and Richard's help and Rare Cancer's help. My family, friends and workmates were extremely generous, to say the least. In a short few weeks, through their Rare Cancers website portal, their Sick or Treat, they donated close to $180,000 for my treatment. Left me extremely humbled, quite embarrassed, and pretty much at a loss to say how to say thank you. I still don't really know how to say thank you. And I feel pretty uneasy about talking about that generosity. I've asked myself millions of times why that response. I'm still at a bit of a loss. I'm just an average Joe. My mother said, treat people the way you'd like to be treated, and I took that on board fairly early on. But the best thing I can come up with to think why I had that response was for three reasons. I guess one, because I've always been a fairly healthy living person, or a very healthy living person, who places a large emphasis on my family, my children, my relationships and my personal fitness. Secondly, because literally this type of cancer could happen to anyone, absolutely anyone, anytime. And I think finally, and probably the real reason why they chipped in and were so generous was because they viewed and responded to the inequity of a rare style cancer patient paying that kind of money just to access treatment. It's just not an added bonus treatment, it's something you need to stay alive. So I think that's what really struck a chord with people. I've done my best to thank all of those people. I hope they feel I have, but I do still feel quite embarrassed and to a big extent pretty unworthy of such gratitude. I'm not too sure how many people would feel they're worthy of that kind of gratitude. Look, I'm coming to the end of it, so please bear with me like I've said. I'd just like to mention an article on my particular targeted gene therapy drug that was recently published, and also to highlight a further example of a disadvantage of developing a rare cancer like mine. As it currently stands, fortunately for my lung-style ALK positive cancer, Xalkori is covered by PBS. Took a long time, but it is, which is fantastic. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that my gene mutation ALK positive cancer can and often does occur in other parts of the body. And I couldn't believe it when I heard that my exact mutation style cancer that does not occur here is not covered under the PBS. So please, if you do have a chance, educate yourself on that side of Xalkori. The article was called "Why Does the Same Drug Cost One Cancer Patient 196 Times More Than Another?" It was published, Rare Cancers Australia was involved in the production of the article. It was published in Marie Claire Australia, January edition. It's available online. I've accessed it many times. I've forwarded it on many times. And essentially it asks the question, why does it cost me $450 a year, yet remains close to $90,000 a year for a patient with an ALK positive tumour that didn't originate in their lungs? From what I've been told, this kind of inequality stems from the fact that cancer treatments have advanced very rapidly, and the system associated with their trialling and their access requires a lot of improvement. So yeah, please find that article. Why does the same drug cost one cancer patient 196 times more than another? Look, I'll wrap up shortly. I appreciate your attention. I realise I've probably gone on for a while. It's probably an understatement right there. I felt, though, that giving a detailed picture of what I've experienced so far as a patient, or as a rare cancer patient, would be enlightening. I hope I've explained that these recently developed targeted gene therapy drugs have far superior response rates with far fewer side effects than traditional form of cancer therapies. So much so that patients can live completely normal lives, albeit for limited periods of time, but normal lives without debilitating side effects. They can be far healthier partners, parents, members of society, and considering the much improved health they experience, they can continue to work, they can pay tax, they can rely far less on government support while undergoing these treatments. And I think these facts alone have a huge positive flow-on effects to society. And I hope to have also touched on a number of the considerations patients have when choosing to pursue one of these treatments, particularly the severity of the financial impact they'll endure. I'll again mention the charter of the PBS. It sounds like a broken record, which essentially states its reason for being is to offer timely, reliable, affordable medicines to ordinary Australians, irrespective of their wealth or circumstance. And that leads me to what I also asked before. Why does it take so long for these new generation, more effective and tolerable medications to be subsidised by the PBS? I can't help but feel a possible reason is the concentration on the pure present cost of providing PBS assistance to those on these medications. And I seriously wonder if the health technology assessment process which approves medications for coverage by the PBS, I seriously wonder whether it places enough emphasis on the many positive financial flow-on effects that these new generation medicines provide to society. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Well, thanks, Corey, and thanks, Tricia. It's not easy to get up and tell your own story, but it's in this room. It's absolutely critical that everybody here is reminded of the individuality of patients being treated, and why the patient view and the patient voice is so incredibly important. So thanks to you both, and as for you, Corey, for running over a bit, mate, after what you've been through in the last 2 to 3 years, we would have all sat here for the next 3 hours, no problem. So please thank both of them again. Thank you. I need to remind you that we are going to get to the nits and grits from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for registration with an 8:30 start. So please don't party too late. But there is a pilot over there who might be able to get you to Bermuda or the Bahamas or something if you need a trip, so I'm told. And